by video request of me. That's right, I can do video requests. Today's topic is going to be communism.
I'm actually going to start a video series debunking all popular philosophies and ideologies. I've been focusing very heavily on democracy in the past, and so now I've got my eye on communism for the next little while. And if you want to pick another ideology or any philosopher you want me to debunk, just let me know and I'll do it.
So in this, I'm going to try to give you a really clear and fair intellectual summary of what communism is, and try to debunk communism as well. Now the biggest problem, I would say, in education is the first law of educational institutions, which is be as pedantic as possible. Give as much boring, useless, excessive detail. You need to read a book at least this long in order to understand a very simple idea that could be summarized in one sentence.
Now, in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx repeatedly uses the terms the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and these terms are going to be confusing and people are going to get them mixed up. So I'm just going to say the rich, and then everybody else who are, in his mind, the exploited. The rich and the exploited. Simple.
To accurately summarize communism is very easy. There's two main points. The first point is that private property should be abolished. This is the central idea of communism. How do I know that's the central idea? Because Karl Marx on the second chapter says, to summarize communism, it is the abolition of private property. Now, the second major theme is that rich people suck. Alright? 90% of the Communist Manifesto is a big rant about how the rich people are bad because they do this, the rich people are bad because they do that. Now, if you remember learning about communism in school or reading about it, you probably remember something about communism being very confusing. It doesn't seem to make very much sense when they explain it to you, and that's because there just isn't very much sense in it. 90% of the manifesto, again, is a poetic rant about how rich people are bad. Now I'm going to read some of the manifesto here to give you a good general idea of what most of it sounds like. The rich has stripped of its halo every occupation heretofore honored and looked up to within reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage laborers. The rich has torn away from the family its sentimental value and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation.
Now here's a second quote from the Communist Manifesto. Quote, "For their whole activity leads the people away from the common struggle against the common enemy, the rich, and instead lets them waste their strength on inner religious squabbles as senseless as they are disastrous." Do you like that quote? It's not from the Communist Manifesto. That quote is from Mein Kampf. The only difference is I switched the word Jew for rich people.
Now I'm going to go over some more of the ideas in communism. You've obviously noticed the environmental movement. That's a huge thing in universities. And this likely has roots in communism. It talks about how the rich are exploiting nature for about a paragraph. And it talks about things like how the rich are applying chemistry to industry and agriculture. They're using steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for a cultivation. The next idea, which is talked about quite a bit more, is feminism. If you go to a gender studies course, they have Marxist feminism. That's a whole brand of feminism. So feminism definitely has roots in communism, but not all strands of feminists are necessarily communist. It talks about how capitalism leads to women becoming prostitutes and the exploitation of women sexually. That's a fairly ridiculous argument. Obviously, prostitution existed long before capitalism. It talks about how rich people see wives as objects to be exploited. I think that's pretty ridiculous. There's going to be all kinds of misogynists who are poor. And it talks about how women's groups are important as well. Now, the next idea was abolishing countries and nations and creating this sort of global civilization. And that's a huge thing today in politics you're going to see, and you're going to see that in educational institutions all over. Nationalism versus globalism, that's a big thing. When it comes to politics, everyone's focused on Brexit because that's a nationalism versus globalism issue. Next, Karl Marx strongly believed in democracy and a push for democracy, and you're going to see that all over in academic institutions. That's the biggest thing ever. That's probably one of the biggest things in politics too. Everyone's trying to push for democracy. And this is actually not true democracy he's pushing for. He's pushing for democracy for everyone except the rich, because they're the evil exploiters. So it's basically a democratic dictatorship run by the exploited. Karl Marx says all previous historical movements were movements of minorities or in the interest of minorities. That's obviously factually untrue, and this is why you shouldn't take, the guy too seriously.
There has been majoritarian movements in the past. For one example, democracy. The democracy movement was very much about democracy. And there was also groups of natives who, by Karl Marx's definition, would classify as democratic.
The next idea is communism was against religion. Quoting the manifesto again here. Communism abolishes eternal truth. It abolishes all religion and all morality. This probably has a lot to do with the rise of atheism and the rise of moral relativism. But at the same time, of course, not all atheists are communists, but a lot of atheists are inspired by communist ideology. Now, the next major idea Karl Marx had is violence is the answer. Violence solves everything. He believed that revolution was the only way to remove the rich and to create a democracy of the exploited. There's some ideas about a classless society, and that's a big one in educational institutions. Everything's about equality. And the only other clear idea I noticed was public education. That was one more of his ideas. And that also explains pretty well why the modern left is always pushing for free public education. Now, as far as the implementation of communism goes, Karl Marx has 10 suggestions, and this is in chapter 2. And I'm going to read these off. A lot of these are really stupid. Number 1 is abolishing the property of land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. So that's pretty dumb. I think people should be able to have some amount of land. There should be limitations on how much land a person can own, but people need some basic level of privacy. That is well within reason. Number 2 is a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. That's a good idea. Okay, that's obviously how taxes should be. The rich should be taxed more. The poor should be taxed less. That's reasonable. Number 3 is the abolition of inheritance. Number 4 is confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. That is nuts. That is completely nuts. If you're leaving the country, you should be able to take your property. If you hate the communist regime, you should be able to leave. The idea behind that is preventing, rich people from running away with all the materials of the country and just moving somewhere else because the country's become communist. And again, that's just totally simplistic thinking, right? Now there should be a cap, like there should maybe be a limitation on how much you can take out of the country, right? Like, can you just take an entire factory or an entire, food industry out of the country and rob the nation of 50% of its food? No, right? But I mean, if you want to leave the country with your personal property, of course. Number 5 is a central bank monopoly. Dun dun dun! The Federal Reserve. No, I think he means a collectively controlled central bank. Number 6 is the centralization of communication and transportation. This is to allow the state to develop its internal communication system on the basis of social need. I guess that would make sense at that point in time because you didn't have internet, but today you have internet, so that's kind of a silly idea. Number 7 is improve the environment, and this is, a reasonable goal. You should have some level of environmental concern. Number 8 is Karl Marx believed in forced labor and the establishment of industrial armies, especially through agriculture. So he believed people should be legally obligated to work, and we can see that didn't turn out very well historically, and that's just a horrible idea, right? So a lot of the reason why communism failed isn't because people didn't implement it correctly. It's because they did implement it correctly, and Karl Marx had some pretty fucked up ideas, right? Like when people read that, you know, forced labor, fuck this guy. No offense, but I mean, that's not intellectually respectable at all. And I mean, people did implement that, right? It's called the gulags. Look up the gulags, alright? They're about as bad as the concentration camps of Hitler. Number 9 is the combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, and this is the gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country to spread population throughout the country. So he wants to get rid of the ideas of town and rural area and sort of have an even spread. Equality. I think it's probably a bad idea. You know, some people like the big cities. I think it's better to have choice, right? I like the idea of choice. It's like you can live in like a small town, a medium-sized town, or a big city, or you know, a totally rural, naturalistic environment. I think that's better than just spreading everything. So number 10 is he wanted free education for all children in public schools and the abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Yeah, okay, that one, that's a good idea. I don't think children should be working in factories. Nevertheless, he wanted to also combine education with industrial production. And he wanted also to put like more arts in education, like gymnastics and things like this. So now I'm going to get to my criticisms of communism. I think it's a fatally flawed idea, and I think the reason that it fails in practice is for the exact reason that it's fatally flawed in theory. So the first major thing is communism does not care about the quality of people in power, it only cares about the quantity. So given the choice between collective mob thinking and, you know, an authoritarian dictatorship, I would take collective mob thinking. But given the choice between collective mob thinking and having rational, smart, loving, and understanding people making decisions for government, I think I would take the loving. Next, the stated fundamental summary of communism is to abolish private property. That's such a weird goal. Like, if you're trying to sell communism, I would have said, like, money should be distributed more fairly. That's a better way to sell it. But nevertheless, that's his fundamental goal. And that's such an absurd, and I think it's a really just stupid goal. Like, there should be limitations again on how much private property a person can accumulate, but to just abolish private property is really silly. Next, Karl Marx reasons from this idea that all of history is a matter of class struggle, everything is about classes, only focus on groups, ignore all individuals, and that's another really stupid way of thinking. People within the same class are going to be fighting all the time. You're going to find many examples of history where this is happening. There's a lot of massive factors he's overlooking that determine conflict, such as ideology or differences in moral reasoning. And lastly, when you go into detail, most of his other ideas and criticisms either cannot be applied in modern times and were relevant only to the times, or they were just absurd ideas altogether. So now I want to point out the big things Karl Marx got right, and this is the idea that money should be distributed more fairly, and the capitalist ideology is socially harmful. You know, like guys like Tai Lopez, that kind of crap. If you like this video, share it, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and if you have a video request you really want me to do, let me know, and I usually do every video request.